Independence, developing democracies, and the rule of law. I'm joined by two discussants and one peer commentator, Dr. Tonny Raymond Kirabira, lecturer, Department of Law, Justice and Policing, University of East London, is the first discussant. He was a visiting fellow at Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa, LSE, the Danish National Research Foundation Center Excellence for International Courts at the University of Copenhagen, Leuven Institute of Criminology. He's also a research affiliate with the Refugee Law Initiative at the University of London School of Advanced Study. He has also taught at the University of Greenwich, University of Portsmouth, and Royal Holloway University of London. Dr. Kwadwo Apiegi Ottawa, Associate Professor, School of Law, University of Ghana, Legon, Accra, is the second discussant for today's session. Dr. Kwadwo teaches public international law and international human rights law at the School of Law, University of Ghana. He is a member of the Ghana Bar Association. He completed his LLB at the University of Ghana and his professional law degree at the Ghana School of Law. Thereafter, he proceeded to Dalhousie University and Makerere University, both in Canada, for his LLM and Doctor of Civil Law programs, respectively. He was a Bank of Ireland postdoctoral research fellow at the Irish Centre of Human Rights, National University of Ireland. Peer commentator for today's session is Chipo Mashuta Nkhata. Chipo is a PhD candidate at the Department of Public Law, University of Cape Town, South Africa. Almost done her PhD at the Department of Public Law, University of Cape Town, South Africa. Her PhD focus was on participation in decision-making within prison settings as a tool for enhancing the enjoyment of the right to health, the case of women prisoners in Zambia. Last but not the least, our guest speaker for today's session is Mary Auma. She is currently a doctoral research fellow at the Human Rights and Peace Center at the School of Law, Makerere University. She is also a graduate teaching assistant, assisting in the teaching of constitutional law, health law at the School of Law, Makerere University. Auma also teaches the African human rights system on the short course on advocacy for reproductive justice in Africa. She has authored publications in peer-reviewed journals, including the African Disability Rights Yearbook and Speculum Juris Journal. She also works as independent consultant on disability and human rights, law and policy, providing technical services to government departments and civil society organizations. She is currently pursuing a Doctor of Laws degree from Makerere University. Today, Mary will present Inclusive Constitutionalism, active citizenship, and the right to political participation for persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities in representative politics in Uganda. Mary, you have 30 to 35 minutes for presentation, followed by 5 minutes for comment and questions from both the discussant and peer commentator. If time permits, we will also have a 15 minutes question and answer session with attendees. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Norman. It's a pleasure for me to be here this evening and to have this opportunity to present to you what I'm working on, which is a proposed doctoral thesis that I'm actually going to defend it in about 2 weeks' time. So this gathering for me is really, really important. So I want to thank you all for taking your time to listen to me this evening. So I think I'll go straight into the proposal that I intend to defend. As has already been said, my proposed thesis is on inclusive constitutionalism, active citizenship, and the right to political participation for persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities in representative politics in Uganda. The title is a little bit long. I'm reworking it. In this session, I will be presenting the introduction and background. I will state the problem. I will also mention what the study intends to achieve. I will also highlight the questions that the research will be responding to. I will also mention the significance and why the study is justified. I will briefly touch on the theoretical framework and the gaps in literature, as well as the methodology and the scope of study if time allows. So citizenship, as you may know, is one of those long-standing features of constitutions worldwide. Any country you look at will have a citizenship clause in its constitution. And usually these constitutions will be providing for different aspects of citizenship. They will define the citizenship as is understood in a given country. They will mention what types of citizenships are recognized by a given country. They will also mention how to acquire citizenship of that particular country, and this is standard in almost every constitution in the world. And it is not different for Uganda, where citizenship is also in our 1995 constitution, and it is clear how it is acquired by birth, registration, naturalization, or in cases of children who are found wandering in Uganda without anyone accompanying them, then it will be presumed that they are citizens of Uganda, or even through adoption. So although it would appear that citizenship is something technical, it's a status that has to be bestowed upon you through a constitutional provision. Ideally, citizenship goes beyond statushood. It goes beyond this and goes into a sort of symbiotic relationship that exists on the one hand between the citizen and then the other, and then the state on the other hand. So it denotes a sort of relationship where there are certain rights that are enjoyed by citizens, there are duties that the citizen owes to their state, and allegiance, such as military participation in military. If, for instance, there's a call to arm, a citizen has a duty to rise up and go and fight in defense of their country. And then in return, then the state also has certain obligations towards their citizens that protect their interests, protect their rights, to mention by only a few. So citizenship has been defined by some people as the enjoyment by a natural person of civil and political rights of a polity, as well as the incurring of certain duties which are not afforded to non-citizens. And this status is actually very critical, because when you look, for example, at the Constitution of Uganda, you will find that there are certain rights that, for instance, when you look at the Bill of Rights in the Ugandan Constitution, you will see that every person has a right to do this. Every person, not every citizen. And then there will be particular parts of the Constitution where they will then say every citizen has a right to do this. So it definitely bestows a certain status upon certain people that then in turn then grants them a certain obligation from the state. So citizens of states enjoy rights, they enjoy duties, and some of these rights of citizens include participation in the affairs of the state, participation in the government of the state, as could be expressed through voting and being voted for political office, and this is contained in the different provisions of the Constitution. And the duties of citizens could include payment of taxes, military service, and failure to actually uphold your end of the bargain would be seen as being disruptive to society, if you were to ask philosophers like Aristotle. So this mutual understanding also creates certain reciprocal expectations, which I have already mentioned. But citizenship, as we understand it, as we define it, as I have defined it, was not always defined in a similar manner. It also follows that being a citizen, as we know it today, did not denote to all individuals throughout the history of time. we are going to see that being a citizen and citizenship indeed is something that grew and morphed over time, and different groups ended up becoming citizens at different points in time following certain struggles that were influenced by political, socioeconomic, cultural factors such as, industrial revolutions, the World War, and other factors that came in over time. And slowly over time, different groups of people then started enjoying citizenship. Just to take you back a little bit, in Greece, for example, citizenship was always viewed as a manifestation of political agency, and the citizenship that existed in Greece only extended to male property owners. This meant that even if you lived in Greece or in Athens of the time, if you were a woman, you were not a citizen. If you didn't own property, you were not a citizen. If you were a slave, you did not qualify to be a citizen. It was an exclusive club that was reserved for male property owners. And it was not very different even in the Roman Empire of the time, because and with the Roman Empire specifically, not the Roman Empire, because there had been expansionist tendencies of the empire, certain groups of people, certain territories were annexed. The citizenship that existed in Rome at the time was basically meant to distinguish, for example, between who were actual citizens of the original Roman Empire, the original Roman Republic, or the city of Rome, as opposed to those who were annexed in Africa, in Asia, and other parts of Europe. And this citizenship also continued to change in the Middle Ages with the emergence of the bourgeoisie, which was basically just a privileged class of people. Citizenship then became a status symbol. It was synonymous with privilege. There were certain people who are aristocrats. Let's say the aristocrats who constituted the bourgeoisie were pitted on one hand versus the ordinary common person who was a subject. So where citizenship rights previously existed in Greece and in the Roman Empire, these were now replaced by feudal rights and obligations. Over time, this idea of aristocracy, with the French Revolution and the American Revolution, this understanding of citizenship, as was viewed through aristocracy, then changed into something more of egalitarian. As you know from the French Revolution, the concept of liberty, equality, and equality, this possession of certain civil liberties started to come up as part of an understanding of what citizenship means. Therefore, for you to be a citizen, it meant that you had to enjoy certain liberty, certain levels of equality. That is what came up with the French Revolution. But then citizenship also historically excluded certain groups of people. As I have already mentioned, and as we have seen with Greece and Athens at the time, women were not citizens, slaves were not citizens. Whoever did not own property was not a citizen. So usually people who are perceived as the weaker minority, were not considered citizens. And this continued all the way up to the 20th century. For instance, in Germany, with the Reich citizenship law, where it was determined that Jews were not citizens, they could not vote, could not be voted into power, and the likes. And this is part of the legacy of what citizenship was before it became what we know it as today. At the same time, if you look at the development of the concept of citizenship in Uganda, you will find that at the time before colonialists came into Uganda, when Uganda was still a virgin land, a dark continent, as it was referred to, when the boundaries were not known, citizenship as a concept did not exist. The concept of citizenship that came to Uganda was imported to us at the time of colonialism, with the drawing of boundaries, for instance, of Uganda in 1902. Then the idea of citizenship started to emerge, but it did not come immediately. Even before, the Ugandan people, or the people living in Uganda, were considered subjects of the crown, subjects of Her Majesty, subject of His Majesty. They were not considered citizens, and this is a topic that has been already explored, where you find that the Ugandans were subjects, or the Africans, broadly speaking, were subjects, while the colonialists who inhabited these same territories, such as the governors, were considered citizens. So there was already a bit of a dichotomy, a bit of a difference between the two of us. But then as the state of Uganda started to develop, the concept of citizenship emerged along with it. So as for instance, we were establishing executive councils in 1902, legislative councils in 1920, as well as the different orders in council that were promulgated, and with the building and shaping of the concept of a parliament and the concept of a judiciary, the concept of a state, the concept of a democracy, then the idea of citizenship started to emerge even in Uganda. Be that as it may, it was not until 1945 where, for instance, the first non-European became a member of the Legislative Council. So that also speaks a little bit to how we were viewed, even though the idea of citizenship was growing, how indeed were we viewed as inhabitants of the colony, Uganda. But further to that, the history of citizenship in Uganda has also seen certain contestations as to who amounts to a citizen, who is a citizen, who belongs, who can be considered a citizen of Uganda. So it is not a surprise, for instance, that when you look into our history, in 1971, Idi Amin had to expel the Asians because he said they were not citizens of Uganda, amongst other reasons. And then over time, there have been contestations about, for instance, when it comes to ethnicity, where certain people who inhabited the border territories, at the points where the borders were drawn, for instance, in Sudan, in Rwanda, in the DRC, where people complain and say, you are not Ugandan, you belong to Congo. And the president of Uganda himself has fallen victim to this, to people telling him that he is not a Ugandan, he's Rwandan, and he has to come out time and again to defend himself and say, listen, guys, I am a Musita, I am a Ugandan, I am not a Munyarwanda, and therefore I'm not Rwandan, you know, because then it has consequences for how he then, whether he can continue to govern the country as a president, whether he even qualifies to be a president if he's not Ugandan. So this contestation of citizenship is the backdrop of the proposed research, with the idea being that citizenship, as we understand it, is not a fixed concept. It is a concept that is hotly contested, and that over time different groups of people are coming in and out of the fold of citizenship, either by reason of race, by reason of sex, by reason of ethnicity, by reason of disability. As I will argue in the research, different reasons exist that we can use. Certain contestations exist in the concept of citizenship. Further to that, the concept of citizenship has certain major aspects, such as the rights, as I have already mentioned. And one of the rights, the major one that I will be interrogating in the proposed research, is the right to political participation, which is recognized in Uganda's constitution through voting, through voter registration, through offering oneself up for election. And so we'll be using the social theory of disability to interrogate the right of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disability afforded by their legal citizenship, which is a legal status to their political participation in Uganda, especially and specifically by offering themselves to be voted for political office, not by voting, but they voted for political office. So if it appears then that we have a legal citizenship and that, you know, every citizen has a right to vote, to register for voting, you know, to offer themselves up for elections, where exactly is the problem? So the problem is that the constitution of Uganda, as it stands now, bars persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities from exercising the full extent of their citizenship, from exercising the full extent of political participation. Particularly, the Constitution disqualifies all persons of unsound mind, and I'm using the term that is used in the Constitution, where unsound mind actually then refers to persons with psychosocial or intellectual disability, people who have been found not to have the mental capacity and therefore wrongly the legal capacity from election as members of parliament. And it follows also in the Constitution that once you're barred, if you do not qualify to be a member of parliament or to offer yourself up, then you also do not qualify in other elective offices, including district chairman, vice president's office, the president's office. So put differently then, participation in politics, which is a right enjoyed by everyone, is limited to voting when it comes to persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. And this is, according to me, a violation of several general human rights, international human rights principles, disability specific human rights concessions that are found in different treaties. It's also a violation of Uganda's constitutionally entrenched civic right to political participation. It violates the right to equality and freedom from non-discrimination, as well as equal recognition before the law. So this systemic disenfranchisement of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disability therefore creates a category of Ugandans who are not full citizens. To be able to respond to the question or to attempt to resolve the question, certain research questions have been proposed. First and foremost, I want to get into what the nature and history of the concept of citizenship is, as well as what the foundations of political participation are as a tenet of citizenship. Then I will also get into what the meaning of a Ugandan citizenship is, especially with a mind to our colonial history and colonial legacy. Then I will look at the international standards that have been established that recognize the full enjoyment of the civic rights of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. I will also look at what the role is of the civic right to vote and offer oneself up for election in the realization of the general right to participation and inclusion of persons with psychosocial intellectual disabilities. And then lastly, I will be responding to how the international human rights framework can be incorporated in achieving the right to offer oneself up for election. All this is to say that there are certain strands of scholarship that exist. On the one hand, in line with citizenship, and mostly this is usually through political science, political education, civic education, the understanding of citizenship. On the other hand, there is the understanding of human rights, and I mean the understanding of disability through the idea of human rights, through the concept of human rights. And these have developed perpendicularly, not parallel, in a parallel fashion. So the objective of this research is to establish a nexus that unites these two strands of scholarship that have developed surrounding political participation, because it could be viewed through citizenship, through human rights, but this particular paper wants to unite the two strands into one through the disability lens. So this paper is justified by the heightened vulnerability of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disability, further heightened in comparison to other persons with disabilities, such as physical disabilities. Also, the questions that the research raises have not yet been judicially interrogated in Uganda, so it would be a good idea to lay a bit of a doctrinal foundation for where this interrogation can start. It also plans to provide theoretical and practical responses to legal and practical problems that is of a real significance to a good number of Ugandans, with the anticipation that when it's all done, it will contribute to disability studies, citizenship studies with a unique entrance point. So moving on to the theoretical framework, because this paper will be discussed, the thesis will be discussing a bit of disability, a little bit of political participation, but also widely citizenship. The theoretical framework has then been divided into three major areas, which is disability theories, citizenship theories, and then also political theories. Under the disability theory, the paper will be informed by the social model of disability, or the social theory of disability, as opposed to the medical theory of disability. So I mentioned the medical theory of disability just briefly in a way to contrast and show the difference, being that it's a personal, it's a theory that is concerned with the personal negative traits of individuals, the illnesses that they would say, a mental illness, for example, that are situated within a person's body or a person's mind, and then it ends up pathologizing, making disability a disease, and it is then obsessed with correction of that disease, correction of that illness, correction of what is a deficiency that you have. It does not pay attention to geopolitical, economic, cultural, or social factors, and it is also shrouded in paternalism that is basically expressed in the loss of agency of persons with disabilities. The social theory, on the other hand, and which is what I will be adopting, views impairment, or what the medical people call illnesses, as something that is not inherently disabling. So just because someone has what would be referred to in medical terms as a mental illness does not mean that the person is disabled. Instead, they view disability as an expression of the physical or mental limitation in a social context, a gap between a person's capabilities and the demands of the environment. The idea being that just because you have a certain impairment does not mean you're disabled. You only become disabled when a gap exists between what you're capable of doing and what the environment demands of you. And one of the best examples that is usually used is just because you're a wheelchair user does not mean you're disabled. You definitely have an impairment, but you will only become disabled because a ramp does not exist in a public space that allows you to access certain public spaces in a way that a person without an impairment would. So that gap in the environment and your capabilities is where disability is occasioned. Therefore, it's a form of oppression that is created by society. It is an ostracism that is suffered by people with impairments versus those without. And generally, it respects the fact that human nature is diverse and that we shall not all come looking the same. It's not the same template. We have different abilities, and that the environment should be adjusted to be able to meet those abilities. So this is the framework through which I will be viewing psychosocial and intellectual disabilities in the thesis. In as far as citizenship theories are concerned, I will be looking at the modern democratic theory of citizenship. But to be able to understand the modern democratic theory of citizenship requires me to have a good understanding of the Republican theory, pick specific aspects from it, as well as the what's the other one? Liberal theory of citizenship, and then use them together to come to a sort of mixed theory of citizenship. The Republican theory has already been attributed to the one of Aristotle and Athens and Greece, you know, the one where, and this one hails participation at its helm, political participation. And when Aristotle defines a citizen, he says it is that person who is a ruler and is capable of being ruled. So it is participation. It is the fact that you participate in a judicial office, in a political office, but you also let yourself be ruled by others. It is characterized by rotational occupation of political office. It's characterized by democracy. It's characterized by consensus, coming together and agreeing to certain things. All of these, which are the tenets that were tenets of practice that existed in Athens back in the day. For instance, so there's the citizenship theory. That is what existed in Greece at the time. On the other hand, we have then what existed in Rome, which was the liberal theory of citizenship, in which ideally, like I explained before, there was the Roman citizenship that existed for the people who occupied the city of Rome and those who are outside. So the citizenship that was extended to the people who occupied the people outside the city of Rome was a legal citizenship, a recognition that you exist. However, it was a citizenship that was without the vote. It granted certain rights, certain legal protections, but not necessarily the right to participate. So the modern democracy then comes together with the human rights ideas, as well as the ideas that I mentioned from the French Revolution, from the American Revolution, the participation that comes from Greece, the idea of rights, legal citizenship, all legal rule, popular rule, all of this coming together to form a certain understanding of citizenship, a mixed understanding of citizenship. In terms of political theory, I will be guided by, this is something I'm still debating, so I may not rely very much on it, but I might be guided by the identity politics, which is the fact that disability on its own is elevated to a political identity similar to, for example, sex, race, and other political identities. The idea that therefore, by excluding a person with disability, you're excluding a specific identity. And this will go hand in hand with the critical disability theory. And then there are also some, especially the post-colonial theory, which I have already hit on a little bit, but it's basically addressing the colonial legacies that existed and how they continue to manifest in our approach to disability and citizenship of persons with disabilities in Uganda today. For example, the for example, legacies of colonial laws on medicalizing mental illnesses, to mention but just a few. So it is working through the history and seeing how certain legacies continue to impact us, and how then we can move forward in line, in view of the new theories such as the social theory of disability. I think that basically is it for theoretical framework. Certain research gaps exist, such as a disjoint between citizenship and disability, which I have mentioned already. The application of a human rights framework to the citizenship right to political participation is also something that I will be addressing, as well as certain knowledge gaps, because the growth and development of citizenship has mainly been studied in the North with Eurocentric views, and these are now going to be studied in the Global South with African and the Ugandan context in mind. There are also certain conceptual gaps, including, I've mentioned most of them now. It will be a library-based research with qualitative methods of investigation. It will be both descriptive, analytical, prescriptive, and it will mainly be a doctrinal analysis. So yeah, I think that's it. It will concern persons with intellectual disabilities, the right to political participation, Uganda's historical and constitutional development, as well as it will go into broader legal frameworks for access and inclusion that will permit us to interrogate or to respond to the questions. I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for an excellent presentation. It's a very important topic when it comes to disabilities, especially in the global South countries. Space for people with different kinds of disability is very limited. What to say of limited space? I think there is a very limited understanding of the challenges they face and how to create space for them in the political arena. Let me go straight to our first discussant, Dr. Tonny Kirabira.
Thank you very much, Ms. Auma, for this enriching presentation. It's a good exploration of citizenship of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, particularly looking at the concept of participation and inclusion under the broad arena of citizenship. Indeed, that there is need to explore more in detail how the concepts of citizenship and disability work together in line with the democratic aspirations and the constitutionalism in a country like Uganda. Just some brief comments and one question. Perhaps it would be important to know from the start if there's any practical or normative justification for the semi-citizenship of these persons. What I mean here is, in the first place, why have their rights been excluded or limited in Uganda? And looking at the title of the presentation, but also of the project, the fact that it suggests that active citizenship and the right to political participation for the persons with disabilities, I would rather perhaps think the right to full participation rather than leaving it to participation, because it seems to me that it is only limited. There is participation in terms of being able to elect their leadership, but the exclusion is in relation to the fact that they're not able to present themselves as candidates for election. And that also brings me to the issue of the terminologies. The terminologies of psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. In terms of this, of course, there's been some explanation. about the disabilities in general, but in terms of the study itself, are they going to be grouped together or are they going to be studied together? I'm considering them to be different terminologies, which could as well be perceived to be different groups of people or participants. So I think it's important to have that clarity. And then also, there was mention about the possibility for directive principles of state policy, Article 17 and Article 59 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, as enablers for the participation of these categories of people. The fact that these are directive principles of state policy, it would be important, I think, to have some sort of discussion, maybe in the project itself, on the justiciability of this kind of directive principles. And that's because the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda perhaps could be considered as an enabler of rights, but not a transformative constitution like the one of South Africa of 1998, or the one of Kenya, or the one of India. So I think it will be important to have a discussion, a brief discussion in the project on how the constitutional principles have been interpreted to see if these directive principles could be utilized to enable the participation of the category of persons. But also, generally speaking, the second question that has been posed in the presentation talks about the implementation of international human rights law framework. And also, of course, importantly, is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So it would be important also to have some sort of exploration on how other states have been able to implement, particularly Article 29 of this convention, which talks about the right to political participation, to see how have other states been able to implement this article, because it also varies according to the states. And then I was looking at the theoretical framework. It would be good to also tie it to the third world approaches to international law. The fact that this is a project in Uganda, it would be able to give us more critique. Also, that the fact that there's modern democracy, it's not entirely supposed to be a fit within the context, and that's why I applaud, the presentation for utilizing the post-colonial theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kirabira, for your insightful comments. Let's go to our peer commentator, Chipo.
Great. Thank you so much. And luckily, I was able to hear the presentation from the beginning, towards the end when it kicked me out and I had to rejoin. So I might just ask a question to Mary about the methodology that she intends on using to answer that, because I think I missed that part of the presentation. So I would really appreciate hearing. And but in terms of your questions, your research questions, I think they're quite good. Try and focus a lot on the how questions as opposed to the what questions, because that's really where your contribution will come in. Some of the what questions that you have listed are questions that I think have been asked and answered, but are necessary in your context for contextualizing the conversation that you're going to have within the Ugandan system. So whereas they're important questions, I'm not so sure it's necessary for you to list them as research questions. You could still answer those questions in the thesis in the course of your research. The concept of citizenship, I think, also needs a bit more refining. I love the approach that you have taken because it seems a lot more holistic. Sev, I'm not hearing so much about citizenship as a practice. So you talk a lot around the citizenship as a status. Somewhere in your presentation, you've given some really good examples about how citizenship was conceptualized in under different systems and under different governments, and how it is now conceptualized, and the fact that increasingly there's more recognition of citizenship for groups, particularly that have been recognized as marginalized and vulnerable. For example, women, children, persons with disabilities. So I think as a practice, you need to emphasize, and this is the question, to the extent to which I want to know what your methodology is, because as a practice, the label of being called a citizen might not be as important if you're still able to practice citizenship in reality. You know, if you're able to go out and vote, as Tonny referred to earlier, you know, it's limited to a certain extent. Have you had cases where, other than the law that is documented, persons with intellectual or psychosocial disabilities have attempted to, you know, file in a nomination and they've been rejected? Have those, you know, cases been documented? How well will you use that in your thesis? Because then it can show you what the actual practice is and whether there's really a problem in fact. I also agree with you completely that citizenship is not a fixed concept. And I just wanted to find out to what extent you will interrogate what this means for persons with intellectual, in terms of how do persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities conceptualize themselves as citizens? Do they, you know, and it's linked to the previous comment about citizenship as practice, do they see themselves as being able and willing and entitled to participate politically? And if not, why not? So that even if you fix the law, you don't have a problem of what's happening in practice. So it would be a good way to understand how do they see themselves in that space. Thank you so much. I'll end there.
Thank you, Chico, for very useful comments. I think I agree with most of those comments, and a lot of comments overlap with what Tonny already highlighted. Mary, would you like to respond to these comments or questions?
Yes, please. Thank you so much to Tonny and Chipo for the comments and the questions. I think that they're very important. They point me in a certain direction that maybe I had not looked at before in terms of the comments. I'll just briefly try to answer the questions within the little time. Why have the rights been limited? I think it is mainly attributed to, I attribute it mainly to the medical theory of disability that has sort of directed thought and practice and law on especially persons with psychosocial and intellectual disability over the longest period of time. Even with the current legal framework that exists, for some reason persons with psychosocial and intellectual disability are relegated to that corner of mental illness. They are viewed as people who are mentally ill, and so they do not really come within the human rights framework because the approach has mainly been to treat them. So if a person is mentally ill, they do not have the capacity, the mental capacity and legal capacity to exercise certain rights and certain obligations and duties. So I think that for me, that is where, and it is expressed in the laws, in the practice of the past, and it is for me the reason why these rights have been limited, and which is then what we are trying to change. The direction on the national objectives and directive principles of state policy will exist somewhere. I did not include it in my presentation, but it exists somewhere in the proposal. The terminologies, I think I will relook at them and consider whether maybe there's a need to drop and have only one, which is, but I will see about the terminologies and how to approach them. And yes, thank you for the comment on the UNCRPD, as well as I think the comment on the third world approaches to international law. This is something that I had not actually considered at all. It's something that I'm going to go back and look at. Okay, Yes, and as well as the practice of citizenship. So ideally, yes, the entire maybe did not come out clearly in the presentation, and that thank you for the points that have been raised because there are actually new ones in there. But the entire idea is to show how in practice does this legal citizenship manifest. So the law is there, it is there, legal citizenship exists, but where is the practice of it for these groups of people, and how do they do it, and what those considerations surrounding. So that actually is the basis of the thesis. But I will also look at some of the pointers that have been given here. I think that is about. Oh, before actually I forgot there's a question when you spoke up. Then I remembered about the methodology. I also forgot to add that I have been planning on doing something not comparative, but drawing on certain experiences from certain jurisdictions. Especially, I'm looking at the moment. I'm considering South Africa, but it is still in very, very early stages. But I had been advised previously to consider certain comparatives that are relatable. So something from the global South and maybe specifically Africa. So that is something that I plan to incorporate a little bit later.
Great, fantastic. Allow me to open the virtual floor to the question and answer session. If any of the attendees has any questions or comments to make. Well, in that case, allow me to ask a question, just a comment. I think it is more addition to what Tonny and Chico already highlighted. I think one of the strengths of the project I could see, and you highlighted, stressed that gap, in the significance, the slides related to significance of the research and the gap in the research is about that this topic, disability rights and the laws and regulations about them, protecting them, are few studies focus on that, and I think that's a very good contribution to overall literature, the wider literature on disabilities, people, the rights of people with different kinds of disability in the global South. One thing you may wish to consider is that when you put this thing, focus on these two kinds of disability, in order to make your study more systematic, I think it's more important to think about the understanding the definition of disability in different countries. What is actually disability, and then classify, categorize, and list different kinds of disabilities. You don't need to go into the detail, just mention and demonstrate to your readers that you're aware of these different kinds of disabilities, and then it's absolutely fine to focus on any particular kind of disability, not the list of all types of disabilities, physical, intellectual, psychological. It's absolutely fine, but when you focus on that, you need to give some idea why you want to focus on these two particular kinds of disability, like what actually leads you to focus on that particular kinds of disability and exclude all other disabilities, and why their rights and their inclusion matters. Is it something contextual, some local regional developments going on that necessitate investigation, inquiry into this particular kind of disability, or is it something else that makes you to focus on these two particular kind of disabilities, and then also try to unpack, because psychosocial is a very technical terms, you see, for especially for people from law, politics. It falls more into psychology studies, and to give some idea of those who are not related to this field, that what does it actually mean. That would be very useful. Other than that, it's a very good addition. I mean, there's no harm in investigating that. It makes your studies very interdisciplinary. Another thing which I was actually thinking about, that you may also wish to conduct some interviews, the field interviews with these people who have some disability, and to take their account, their input into account, and analyze that data. that might further, develop your study. That's just a comment. You don't need to respond it. You may wish to think about that thing. Okay. All right, great. Let me, check again if there is any question, any final comments. In that case, thank you, Mary, Auma, for your presentation. It was very useful. The overall the contents that really added to our knowledge about the political participation, the inclusive constitutionalism in Uganda in particular, and Africa in general. Thank you very much, Dr. Tonny, Chipo, for your useful comments. I'm sure Mary would, have found it very useful and would be able to process it during the research and data analysis. Thank you all who attended the session. Same time next week, let's meet our next guest speaker, the details of which will be communicated to you through email. Until then, look after yourself. Have a great day. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.